The Chosen One's Burden. The fluorescent lights of the Marine Research Lab flickered as Dr. Sarah Chen peered through her microscope at yet another anomalous deep-sea sample. 3 months ago, she discovered unusual cellular structures in specimens from the Mariana Trench that defied conventional biology. Tonight, those same cells were exhibiting properties that made her question everything she knew about marine life. "This can't be right," she muttered, adjusting the microscope's focus. The cells weren't just moving. They were reorganizing themselves with an intelligence that seemed almost deliberate. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her tablet to record another observation. That's when the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, the kind that made even the most rational scientist question their senses. Sarah stood perfectly still, waiting for the backup generators to kick in. They didn't. Instead, the water in all 12 of her research tanks began to glow with a bioluminescent blue that she'd never seen before. "Dr. Chen." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, resonating in her chest like the deep note of a cello. "You have been chosen." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as a figure emerged from the largest tank, humanoid but clearly not human. Its skin was a translucent silver that pulsed with patterns of light, and its eyes were solid black, like the depths of the ocean itself. Water cascaded off its form, but instead of pooling on the floor, it orbited around the creature like a living constellation. "I am Valen of the Merkai," the being said, its voice somehow both masculine and feminine. "And you are the one we have been watching." Sarah backed away until she hit her desk, knocking over a stack of research papers. "Watching? What do you mean watching?" The creature, Valen, moved closer with an otherworldly grace. "Your work with deep-sea genetics, your understanding of evolutionary adaptation, your dedication to preserving Earth's oceans, these are not coincidences, Dr. Chen. We have guided your career from the beginning." Anger flared through Sarah's fear. "You've been manipulating my life." "Why?" "Because our species is dying." Valen's bioluminescent patterns dimmed slightly, "and you may be the only one who can save us. We are an ancient race, Dr. Chen. We have lived in Earth's oceans since before your species learned to walk upright. But now, our genetic diversity is failing. Each generation becomes weaker, less viable. We need fresh blood." Sarah's scientific mind began racing ahead of her fear. "You need human genetic material for hybridization experiments." "Not experiments." Valen's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile. "Unity. A true blending of our species. And you, Dr. Chen, have the exact genetic markers we need." "And if I refuse?" "You won't." Valen raised a hand, and the water around them formed into complex molecular structures that Sarah recognized from her research. "Because you've already discovered what we wanted you to find. Those cells you've been studying. They're dying, just like we are. And you know, better than anyone, what their extinction would mean for Earth's oceans." Sarah's mouth went dry as the implications hit her. Those cells were responsible for regulating deep-sea oxygen production. If they died out, the entire marine ecosystem would collapse. "Precisely." Valen moved closer, and Sarah found she no longer had the urge to back away. "We are not here to conquer or destroy, Dr. Chen. We are here to survive, together. Your genetics, combined with ours, could create a hybrid strain capable of saving both our species." "But why me?" "There are thousands of marine biologists. None with your specific genetic makeup. None with your particular adaptabilities." Valen gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the water droplets around them, showing Sarah's complete genetic sequence. "You carry certain markers, mutations that make you uniquely compatible with our species. It's not just your mind we need, Dr. Chen. It's your DNA." Sarah stared at her own genetic code floating in the air, noticing patterns she'd never seen before. Her scientific curiosity began to overwhelm her fear. "These markers, they're not natural, are they?" Your great-grandmother was part of our first attempt at hybridization. The program was unsuccessful, but it left traces in your family line. Traces that have culminated in you. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, her work, it had all been orchestrated. She should have been terrified, or angry, or both. Instead, she felt something else. Purpose. What exactly would this unity involve? Valen's bioluminescent patterns brightened. You would come with me to our city in the depths. You would help us perfect the hybridization process. And yes, you would need to participate in it personally. You mean, you would need to mate with one of our kind. Sarah let out a slightly hysterical laugh. And I suppose you're volunteering. No, Valen's patterns shifted to something more serious. I am merely the messenger. Your actual genetic partner has already been chosen. He awaits you in the deep. Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Valen's head tilted slightly. Your security systems have detected the power outage. We have little time. You must decide now, Dr. Chen. Will you come with me and help save 2 species? Or will you stay and watch both our races slowly decay? Sarah looked around her lab. At the years of research, at the dying cells under her microscope, at the life she thought she'd chosen for herself. Then she looked at Valen, at the living proof that everything she thought she knew about marine biology was just the surface of a much deeper truth. I'll come, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. But I have conditions. Valen's patterns pulsed with what might have been amusement. Of course you do. You wouldn't be the one we chose if you didn't. We can discuss them on the way down. The being extended a hand, water swirling around it in complex patterns. Shall we begin? Sarah took one last look at her lab, then reached for Valen's hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt a tingling sensation spread up her arm. The water around them began to swirl faster, forming a cocoon of liquid light. Welcome, Valen said, to the deep. And with that, Dr. Sarah Chen disappeared from the surface world, leaving only the gentle lapping of water in her wake. Depths of diplomacy. The descent into the abyss should have killed Sarah Chen. Instead, she found herself encased in a bubble of what Valen called living water, a substance that somehow allowed her to breathe and withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Through the translucent membrane, she watched as the last traces of sunlight disappeared above them, replaced by the bioluminescent glow of their descent path. How far down are we going? Sarah asked, her voice distorted by the strange medium surrounding her. The city of Merkython lies at 12,000 meters, Valen replied, moving through the water beside her with serpentine grace. What your people call the Challenger Deep is merely our shallow outskirts. Sarah's scientific mind raced with calculations. That's impossible. The pressure alone is precisely why we chose this location, Valen interrupted. No surface-dwelling species could survive here without our assistance. It has kept us hidden, safe, for millennia. The darkness ahead suddenly blazed with light, revealing a sight that made Sarah forget to breathe, even within her protective bubble. A city sprawled across the ocean floor, its architecture a mesmerizing blend of organic and geometric forms. Buildings grew like crystal formations, pulsing with internal light that shifted in complex patterns. Schools of engineered sea life moved between structures in organized formations, carrying cargo and passengers. Welcome, Valen said, to the last city of the Merkai. They descended toward what appeared to be a massive structure of living coral and crystalline metal. As they approached, Sarah noticed figures gathering, dozens of Merkai, their bodies displaying a rainbow of bioluminescent patterns. The council awaits, Valen explained. They will want to evaluate you personally. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. You mean they might reject me? After bringing me all the way down here? They might, but they won't. Valen's patterns shifted to something that might have been amusement. You've already impressed them more than you know. The bubble surrounding Sarah merged with the atmosphere of a vast chamber, and she found herself breathing water that felt like air. The gathered Merkai watched her with their dark eyes, their patterns shifting in what she assumed was their form of communication. One figure stepped forward, taller than the others, its skin rippling with patterns of deep purple and gold. "I am Orcs, first speaker of the Merkai Council," it announced in that same resonant voice that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to her mind. "You stand in the Hall of Equilibrium, where our ancestors first made the pact with surface dwellers 12,000 years ago." "What pact?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The agreement that we would remain hidden, shepherding the ocean's health from the depths, while humanity evolved on the surface." Korix's patterns darkened. "But now both our species face extinction if we cannot find a way to adapt together." Another council member moved forward, this one displaying aggressive red patterns. "We should not trust our future to a surface dweller. The genetic program failed before." "Because we chose poorly," interrupted a third council member, their patterns a calm blue. "Dr. Chen's genetic markers are far more promising than any previous candidate." "If I may," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness, "I'd like to see your genetic data. All of it. If you want my help, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." The chamber fell silent. Even the water seemed to still around them. Then Korix's patterns brightened. "You see," they said to the other council members, "she thinks like one of us already. Show her." The water around Sarah came alive with floating displays of genetic information, complex molecular structures and population statistics that told a stark story. The Merkai were experiencing catastrophic genetic drift, their population losing vital traits with each generation. But what caught her attention were the markers that appeared again and again in their degrading genome. "These sequences," she said, pointing to specific structures, "they're almost identical to the ones you showed me in my own DNA, but they're breaking down in your population." "Yes," Korix confirmed. "The very adaptations that allow us to survive at these depths are failing. Without an infusion of specific human genetic material, your genetic material, our species will not survive another generation." "But there's something you haven't told me yet, isn't there?" Sarah's years of research experience had taught her to recognize when data was being withheld. "These patterns, they suggest the degradation isn't natural. Something is causing this." The council members' patterns flickered rapidly, a silent debate playing out in light and color. Finally, Korix spoke again. "You are correct. We are under attack, Dr. Chen. Not by weapons or warfare, but by a biological agent introduced into our population by others." "Others?" Sarah felt a chill despite the thermal regulation of the chamber. "You mean there are more advanced species out there?" "The Nixthar," the red-patterned council member spat, their lights flashing with obvious hatred. "They seed young worlds with life, then return to harvest the results once they reach sufficient complexity. They see both our species as nothing more than genetic resources to be exploited. They created the agent that's degrading your DNA," Sarah realized. "But why hasn't it affected humans?" "Because humanity's genetic diversity is still robust enough to resist it," Valen explained. "It's why we've been guiding certain human bloodlines, preparing for this moment. Your DNA contains natural resistance factors that, when combined with our advanced adaptation abilities, could create a hybrid strain immune to the Nixthar's influence." Sarah's mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about saving the Merkai anymore. It was about protecting all life on Earth from an advanced hostile species. "You said something about a mate chosen for me." Korix's patterns shifted to something almost gentle. "Yes, Kirval, our most accomplished genetic architect. He has been preparing for your arrival for many cycles." The first speaker gestured, and a new figure emerged from the assembled council. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Kirval was unlike any other Merkai she'd seen. His form was more humanoid, his patterns a subtle dance of silver and blue that reminded her of moonlight on water. When their eyes met, she felt a jolt of recognition, not physical attraction, but a deeper resonance, as if their very DNA was reaching out to each other. "Hello, Sarah Chen," Kirval said, his voice carrying harmonics that made her skin tingle. "I believe together we can save both our worlds." Looking into his alien eyes, Sarah realized she was about to remake history, not just human history, but the history of life on Earth itself. The weight of that responsibility should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a surge of determination that she recognized as quintessentially human. "Well then," she said, squaring her shoulders, "let's get to work." Trial by water. The Merkai genetic laboratory defied everything Sarah thought she knew about molecular biology. Instead of microscopes and Petri dishes, they used living crystals that could visualize DNA structures in real time, floating in three-dimensional displays that she could manipulate with mere thoughts. After 3 days of intensive work with Kirval, she was still discovering new wonders. "Your adaptation rate is remarkable," Kirval observed, his patterns shifting in what Sarah had begun to recognize as admiration. "Most surface dwellers take weeks to interface with our biotechnology." Sarah guided a strand of DNA through a complex mutation sequence, watching as the molecules rearrange themselves. "Maybe it's those special genes you've been cultivating in my family line," she said, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. The fact that her entire genetic heritage had been engineered still bothered her. Kirval's patterns dimmed slightly. "You're angry about that. Wouldn't you be?" She let the DNA structure dissolve back into the ambient water. "My whole life, everything I've accomplished, was any of it really my choice? All of it was." Kirval moved closer, his bioluminescence pulsing in gentle waves that seemed to reach out to her. "We may have guided your ancestors, but every decision you made, every achievement, came from your own determination. That's precisely why you're here." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began pulsing through the water, deep, resonant tones that made her bones vibrate. Kirval's patterns flashed with concern. "What is it?" she asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "The Nixthar," he said, his voice tight. "They found us sooner than expected. Come with me." They swam rapidly through the crystalline corridors of the research complex, joining streams of Merkai, all heading toward what appeared to be a central command center. The council was already assembled, their patterns a chaotic display of urgent communication. "Shober," Orcs commanded as they entered. The water above them transformed into a vast display of the ocean surrounding the city. Sarah gasped as she saw them, massive shapes descending from above, their forms so alien they hurt her eyes to look at. They seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist, their surfaces reflecting light in ways that defied physics. "They're not ships," Kirval explained, sensing her confusion. "They're biomechanical entities, living weapons the Nixthar use to harvest genetic material from target species. How long do we have?" "Hours, at most." Orcs' patterns pulsed with urgency. "Our defenses will not hold against a full harvesting swarm. The hybridization program must be accelerated." Sarah's mind raced through calculations. "But we're nowhere near ready for full genetic integration. The compatibility sequences are still unstable. Then we must stabilize them." Kirval's patterns shifted to a determination that matched her own. "You've already shown remarkable affinity for our genetic structure. If we proceed with the physical bonding now, we might be able to catalyze the adaptation process naturally." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "You mean?" "Yes." Kirval's patterns softened, becoming almost intimate. "We must mate. Now. The emotional and physical connection will help stabilize the genetic transfer. And if it doesn't work, then both our species fall to the Nixthar," the Red Pattern Council member cut in. "They will strip mine our genetic material and leave our worlds barren." Sarah looked up at the display again, watching the alien harvesters descend with inexorable purpose. Then she looked at Kirval, seeing past his alien appearance to the intelligence and compassion that had drawn her to him over the past days. What do we need to do? The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah was led to a chamber she'd never seen before, where living crystals grew in spiral patterns that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. HFY scientists attached monitoring devices to her skin, not mechanical sensors, but tiny symbiotic organisms that merged with her flesh. The bonding chamber will amplify our genetic resonance, Curval explained as he joined her. His patterns had shifted to deeper, more primal colors that made her skin tingle. But the connection must be complete. Sarah understood. This wasn't just about physical mating. It was about a total merger of their genetic material, catalyzed by the chamber's technology, and their own biological compatibility. The fact that she found him increasingly attractive despite his alien nature was probably part of their engineered compatibility. But at this moment, she didn't care. "I'm ready," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The chamber activated, the crystal spirals beginning to pulse with energy that she could feel in her very DNA. As Curval approached her, his bioluminescent patterns synchronized with the chamber's rhythms. When he touched her, it felt like electricity coursing between them. What followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical. It was as if their genetic structures were dancing together, reaching out across the vast evolutionary distance between their species to find common ground. She could feel her DNA responding, transforming, adapting in ways that should have been impossible. Above them, the Nixthar harvesters drew ever closer, but in that moment, all Sarah could focus on was the connection forming between her and Curval. It was beautiful and terrifying, and absolutely necessary. As their bodies joined, Sarah felt something unlock deep within her genes, something that had been waiting for this moment for generations. Her skin began to shimmer with its own bioluminescence, matching Curval's patterns. The chamber's crystals sang with resonant energy as their DNA merged and reformed into something entirely new. In that moment of transformation, Sarah realized that this wasn't just about saving their species anymore. It was about evolution itself, about life finding a way to survive, adapt, and become something greater than the sum of its parts. And as the Nixthar descended toward the city, Sarah Chen, no longer entirely human but not quite Merkei, prepared to show them exactly what this new hybrid species could do. Rising tide. Sarah's new body hummed with power she barely understood. The genetic merger with Curval had transformed her in ways that went far beyond the obvious physical changes. Her skin now rippled with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with her emotions, and she could feel the pressure of the deep ocean like a comforting embrace rather than a crushing force. The transformation is more complete than we anticipated, Cortex observed as Sarah demonstrated her ability to manipulate the living water around her. Your human adaptability has amplified our genetic gifts beyond our projections. It's not just physical, Sarah said, watching patterns of light dance across her skin. I can feel the ocean, all of it. The currents, the life forms, even the Nixthar ships. She stopped, her patterns flashing with sudden realization. That's it. That's how we can fight them. Curval moved closer, his patterns synchronizing with hers in a way that made her heart race. What do you see? The Nixthar aren't just harvesting genetic material, Sarah explained, her scientist's mind racing ahead of her words. They're using the ocean itself as a transmission medium for their biological agents. But with my hybrid DNA, I can sense their carrier wave. And if we can sense it, we can disrupt it, Curval finished, his patterns brightening with excitement. The human portion of your genome is providing a perspective we never had before. Sarah swam to the genetic visualization interface, her movements now as fluid as any Merkei. Look at this sequence, she said, pulling up a strand of her hybrid DNA. The human genes aren't just resistant to the Nixthar agent. They actively produce compounds that break it down. If we can amplify this effect through your biotechnology, we could turn the entire ocean into a weapon against them. Cortex breathed, their patterns flashing with hope for the first time since the crisis began. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Sarah and Kirval worked together seamlessly, their merged consciousness allowing them to solve complex genetic problems with unprecedented speed. The Merkay's living technology responded to their hybrid commands in ways it never had before, creating new biological countermeasures at an astronomical rate. But the Nixthar weren't idle. The first attack came without warning, a pulse of energy that swept through the water, attempting to forcibly trigger genetic breakdown in all living organisms it touched. Sarah felt it coming seconds before it hit, her new senses screaming danger. "Everyone down," she shouted, simultaneously projecting a shield of living water around the laboratory. The pulse hit like a tidal wave, but her hybrid biology held firm. Around her, she could see other Merkay struggling, their patterns flickering as their genetic structure came under attack. "Stay with me," she heard Kirval's voice in her mind, as much as in the water around them. Their patterns synchronized automatically, strengthening each other. Together, they pushed back against the genetic attack, their hybrid DNA serving as a template for resistance. "The countermeasure is ready," one of the Merkay scientists announced, their patterns weak but determined. "But we have no way to distribute it throughout the ocean quickly enough." Sarah looked at Kirval, an idea forming between them through their shared consciousness. "Yes, we do," they said in unison. The plan was simultaneously brilliant and insane. They would use the Merkay city's crystal network as a biological amplifier, with Sarah and Kirval serving as the focal point. Their hybrid DNA would be the template for a massive wave of genetic resistance that would spread through the ocean at the speed of sound. "It could kill you both," Orcs warned, their patterns showing genuine concern. "No one has ever attempted to interface with the crystal network at this scale. If we do nothing, we all die anyway," Sarah replied, her patterns steady with determination. She turned to Kirval. "Ready?" His response was to extend his hand, their patterns merging into a dazzling display of human determination and Merkay wisdom. Together, they swam to the central crystal spire of the city, where the largest genetic amplifier waited. The interface was like nothing Sarah had ever experienced. The moment they connected to the crystal network, her consciousness expanded to encompass the entire ocean. She could feel every current, every life form, every pulse of the Nixthar's deadly harvest. Through her connection with Kirval, she could also feel the ancient wisdom of the Merkay, generations of knowledge flowing through their shared mind. The Nixthar sensed what they were attempting. Their ships began to descend faster, their harvest beams cutting through the water like deadly searchlights. But they were too late. Sarah and Kirval released their hybrid genetic template into the crystal network. The ocean itself seemed to pause for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then, like a shockwave of pure life, the countermeasure burst outward in all directions. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Wherever the wave touched, life responded. Coral colonies blazed with new growth. Schools of fish glowed with renewed genetic vigor. And the Nixthar ships, their biological components suddenly exposed to the hybrid DNA's aggressive resistance, began to writhe and dissolve. Sarah watched through her expanded consciousness as the harvesters tried to retreat, their dimensional folding abilities failing as their living components rebelled against them. Some imploded under the pressure of the deep, while others simply dissolved into clouds of inert organic matter. But the victory came at a cost. The strain of channeling such enormous power through their bodies was taking its toll. Sarah could feel her consciousness starting to fragment, the ocean's vastness threatening to sweep her away. Only Kirval's presence, his patterns locked with hers in an unbreakable bond, kept her anchored to herself. As the last Nixthar ship disintegrated, Sarah felt herself slipping into darkness. The last thing she saw was Kirval's patterns, still synchronized perfectly with her own, promising that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something entirely new. Evolution's edge. Sarah awakened to the sound of singing crystals and the gentle pulse of bioluminescent light. Her consciousness slowly coalesced, bringing with it memories of the battle against the Nixthar and the desperate gambit that had saved both their species. Her new hybrid body felt different, stronger, more integrated, as if the final merger with the crystal network had completed some fundamental transformation. "Welcome back." Kirval's familiar resonance washed over her. His patterns, now permanently synchronized with hers, showed relief and joy. "You've been unconscious for 3 cycles." Sarah tried to sit up, marveling at how natural it felt to be breathing water. The countermeasure, did it work? Beyond our wildest expectations, Orcs emerged from the shadows of the healing chamber, their patterns radiating satisfaction. The hybrid genetic template you and Kirval released has transformed the entire ocean ecosystem. The Nexthar's harvesting technology is useless now. Earth's oceans have become deadly to them. But that's not all. Kirval added, his patterns shifting to show excitement. "Show her." The water around them, filled with data streams, genetic readings from across the world's oceans. Sarah's enhanced mind processed the information instantly, and what she saw made her catch her breath. The hybrid DNA hadn't just protected against the Nixthar. It had sparked an evolutionary leap in marine life everywhere. Coral reefs were regenerating at impossible speeds, dying species were rebounding, and new forms of life were emerging that combined the best aspects of both human adaptability and Merkai biological mastery. "We did more than save ourselves," she whispered, watching the data flow. "We initiated the next stage of Earth's evolution. And now you must choose," Orcs said solemnly. "The transformation you underwent is not reversible. You can never fully return to the surface world. But you need not stay here either. Many of our young ones wish to explore the shallower waters, to establish new colonies where our peoples can interact more freely. You and Kirval could lead them." Sarah felt Kirval's consciousness brush against hers, not pushing, just offering support. The choice had to be hers. She thought about her old life, the research lab, the endless grant applications, the limited understanding of her surface colleagues. Then she looked at her new form, at the vast potential they had unleashed, at the man beside her who was both alien and somehow perfectly right. "I want to show you something first," she said, standing. Her body moved through the water with practiced grace now, her patterns shifting with purpose. "Follow me." She led them to the genetic laboratory where it had all begun. With practiced ease, she called up a new genetic sequence, one she had been working on in her mind during her recovery. "The hybridization doesn't have to stop with us," she explained, expanding the display to show potential evolutionary paths. "With our combined knowledge, we could guide the development of a true amphibious species, not just isolated hybrids like myself, but a whole new branch of humanity that could live in both worlds. It would take generations, careful genetic engineering, but—" "You want to continue the work," Kirval said, his patterns brightening with understanding and approval. "More than that." Sarah's own patterns pulsed with intensity. "I want to bridge our worlds." The Nexthar tried to harvest Earth's genetic diversity. Instead, they forced us to create something entirely new. Humanity is ready to know about the Merkai. Together, we could face whatever other threats the galaxy holds. "It will not be easy," Orcs warned. "Many humans will fear us. Many Merkai will resist change. When has that ever stopped humanity from advancing?" Sarah's patterns flashed with determination, the same human determination that had taken her species from caves to space in a mere eye blink of evolutionary time. "We adapt. We overcome. And now, we have the wisdom of the Merkai to guide us." Kirval moved closer, his patterns intertwining with hers in the intimate dance they had perfected. "The council will need to be convinced. Then let's convince them." Sarah manipulated the genetic display, showing potential futures that made even Orcs' patterns pulse with excitement. Humanity's drive to explore combined with Merkai biological mastery. We could terraform the oceans of other worlds, establish colonies across the galaxy, create whole new branches of evolution. She turned to face the assembled Merkai, her hybrid form radiating with purpose. The next star saw our worlds as resources to be harvested. Instead, we'll show them what life can really do when it works together. We'll create something so far beyond their understanding that they'll never dare threaten Earth again. Oryx's patterns shifted through a complex series of colors before settling on a bright, determined hue. "Speak to the council," they said. "Show them this vision of yours. If you can convince them as you've convinced me, you'll have your chance to reshape both our worlds." Sarah looked at Curavel, seeing in his patterns the same excitement and determination she felt. They had already changed the course of evolution itself. What was a little diplomacy compared to that? "Together?" she asked, extending her hand. "Always," he replied, her patterns synchronizing into something beautiful and new. As they swam toward the council chambers, Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her here. From a curious marine biologist to humanity's ambassador to an ancient underwater civilization, from a lonely researcher to half of something entirely new in the universe. The next star had meant to harvest Earth's genetic potential. Instead, they had catalyzed its next great leap forward. And this was just the beginning. High above, sunlight filtered down through 12,000 meters of water, its rays scattered and diffused, but still reaching them. Like that light, humanity's future would find a way to penetrate the depths, merging with the ancient wisdom of the Merkei to illuminate paths no one had ever dreamed possible. Sarah Chen, hybrid, scientist, pioneer, smiled with both sets of DNA and prepared to show the council exactly what humanity could bring to their shared evolution. The future was going to be fascinating indeed.